Welcome to the Athletic Fantasy Cheat Sheet presented by Jock Market, where daily fantasy sports becomes a stock exchange. You can download the Jock Market app in the App Store today, Android coming soon. I'm Derek Van Riper here along with Jake Seeley and Brandon Funston, getting you ready for week 3 of this fantasy football season. Later in today's show, we'll be joined by Michael Beller and the Athletics' Matt Barrows. Will check in with us about the 49ers as they prepare for a matchup against the Giants. We'll get to some of your questions throughout the show as well. Send those our way on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you might be joining us on this fine morning. We'll get to those over the next 90 minutes or so. As we do every week, we're going to start with the top storylines of the week. Gentlemen, tons of injuries last week, an absolute bloodbath for us as fantasy players. And we'll begin with the Saints. Michael Thomas has already been ruled out for tonight's game against the Packers. It's disappointing because that game has so much shootout potential, and we kind of saw the Saints offense sputter a bit against the Raiders without Thomas in week 2. So, Jake, let's go to you first. Traquan Smith stepped up in week 2, 5 catches, 86 yards, 7 targets. What is your hierarchy for the pass catchers in this offense at this point without Michael Thomas?
So I would say Traquan and nobody else at the wide receiver position because it's Jared Cook and Alvin Kamara. It really comes down to what we were talking about last week. The reason I like Traquan Smith, and I didn't even expect him to be used as much as he was in the first half in that role, but he stepped into where Michael Thomas plays. And at this point of Drew Brees' career, going to Emmanuel Sanders at his point of his career, being asked to play outside facing top corners, that's just not Emmanuel Sanders. That's not Drew Brees at this point with his arm. He needs that Michael Thomas role, and that's where Traquan's filling. So I think you look at this going forward, it's Traquan, Kamara, and Cook. Unfortunately, everybody already owns the other ones, but maybe you can go get Smith. And they promoted Benny Fowler, who Drew Brees was making noise for in the preseason. So I don't even know that like Sanders is somebody that it would take much of a flyer on. I'm not saying like go grab Benny Fowler and stash him or even start him, but just the point being is like I just don't know that Sanders is going to be much involved until Thomas gets back.
Yeah, Brandon, I mean, is Emmanuel Sanders even startable in a really deep league based on what we've seen through these first 2 weeks?
I've buried him in the rankings. I've cut him in a team. You look at the last 13 games, he's averaging 36 yards and has 2 touchdowns. And he's been in a situation of opportunity down the stretch with San Francisco and this year with New Orleans. He's just not getting it done. And really, Jake said it, like the way Drew Brees is with his arm strength now and the way where he likes to have his targets. An old 33-year-old Emmanuel Sanders running on the outside is just not optimal. And there's no qualm from me about if you need to cut him to make room for someone else. Like I would cut Emmanuel Sanders and add KJ Hamler, and in fact I did that this week. So
well, here's one for you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Would you rather cut Anthony Miller or Emmanuel Sanders?
I'll take Anthony Miller because you know what? I saw a play in week 1 where Anthony Miller showed some upside, and so I'll chase that because I haven't seen that kind of upside from Emmanuel Sanders in a long, long time.
That's a great drop toss-up, by the way. 2 guys who I had pretty high expectations for who really let us down in week 2 in particular. We got a question there from the Jeff Bridgman, not the fake Jeff Bridgman. A.J. Green or Traquan Smith? A.J. Green's getting a boatload of targets, but they're not necessarily high-quality targets to this point. What do you make of that one, Jake?
Well, he also included the part about Devonta Adams, which at this point, I don't even have Devonta Adams in my rankings, and he's going to fall back on Traquan Smith. So his answer's already made. But if he had Adams, the straight up between A.J. Green and Traquan Smith, I like Traquan Smith. I'm still going A.J. Green one more week. I talked about this earlier this week in the column we talked about on the waiver show. There's a difference between being on target and catchable passes. An on-target pass can have the defender standing in front of the wide receiver. It's still on target. It's just not catchable because the defender's standing there. That's Burrows so far with A.J. Green. He's throwing a lot on target. He's just not connecting with A.J. Green because a lot of them aren't catchable. And A.J. Green has dropped some where he has been like A.J. Green or years past would have caught it. But the volume is, I mean, we're talking about almost double-digit targets each game. So I'm going to go A.J. Green one more week. But for his answer specifically, he can just start both of them and not worry about Adams.
Yeah, Adams at this point, officially doubtful. I wouldn't expect him to go. We'll talk about the Packers offense in just a minute. Got one last question for you about the Saints, Brandon. Drew Brees looked his age without Michael Thomas on Monday night. Can he bounce back before Thomas returns to this lineup, or does he kind of fall into that cluster of mid-range quarterbacks right now?
Yeah, I think he falls in that cluster of mid-range quarterbacks right now, and I think what you're going to see with Michael Thomas out, and specifically today, is this is a team that you can run on in the Green Bay Packers, and New Orleans over the last couple of years is getting more and more conservative anyway. So I think you're going to see a whole lot of Alvin Kamara, some Latavius Murray, You'll get Taysom Hill involved, but like it's just not going to be a big air it out kind of day. I don't think Drew Brees is the kind of guy that can bounce back with 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. But can you get 250 and a couple touchdowns because they move the ball and they play it kind of conservatively? Sure, but that kind of feels like his upside. So to me, he's there's a lot better options out there this week, and I think there will be. That'll be a theme until Michael Thomas is back.
Yeah, I gotta say I'm a little surprised to see the over/under ticking up at 53 right now. It opened at 51. Saints 3-point favorites at home in tonight's Sunday night matchup. Let's talk about Devonta Adams. He's got a hamstring injury. He's officially doubtful to play in this one. Jake, you mentioned you don't have him, listed in your rankings, and Brandon, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, 13 targets in the first 2 games, had a handful of drops already, 2 really bad ones against Minnesota in the opener, but he's been ahead of Allen Lazard in the pecking order so far. Do you trust both Valdes-Scantling and Lazard as viable starters, at least in leagues where you got to start 3 receivers this week with Adams likely out?
I think the optimal word here is trust, and I have absolutely no trust in these guys. I don't think they're that great. I think they're very mediocre. Valdes-Scantling's made a couple big plays, and he's the guy that, like, if I'm rolling with one of these guys, I would rather have him because there's more upside with the vertical ability that he brings to the table. Lazard maybe has a better floor. And really, if you happen to have these guys on your roster, this is going to be an opportunity for them. It's not a great opportunity, but it's probably, you would say, they're looking slightly better than usual just because of a volume expectation. But, I'm not getting too excited about these guys. If I have to plug one into my flex, I would live with that, but I'm just not expecting these guys to carry my team this week.
Now, Jake, as you think about this matchup, Marshawn Lattimore, if Devonta Adams were healthy, he'd match up on Adams, but now he's going to get one or maybe both at times of Valdes-Scantling and Lazard. So how does that kind of play into your rankings of the 2 Packers receivers that we're talking about here?
Because of their use so far, it's honestly a toss-up. I wish we had the answer. I wish I knew exactly what the game plan was going to be, because so far Valdes-Scantling's been outside a little bit more than Lazard. Lazard's been in the slot. It's about 8% more. I think it was 44 to 35 or 36, so 8 or 9% more. But both those numbers are over a third of the time, and both those numbers aren't screaming slot options. So if one of them's outside, you worry about Lattimore. You want the one playing inside. But if they're going to rotate like this and move back and forth, I don't know, honestly. Like Valdes-Scantling in years past, you would have felt like, all right, just stick him in the slot and let Lazard play outside. But they've been doing the opposite barely again. So I just think, to Brandon's point, they're both risky. Everybody's just going to want to slam them in. But here's a perfect example. Go look at the game from Thursday Night Football, the Jaguars. Everybody wanted to slam in Shenault, and everybody was slamming Keelan Cole. And Keelan Cole had been playing well, and it was a Chris Conley game, and Minshew also didn't play as great. There's a case to be made when you're taking away a wide receiver 1, especially of Adams' level, that people aren't just going to immediately assume everything that they had.
Right. I think you're going to see the Packers mix and match personnel quite a bit, too, without Adams. Maybe a lot of 2 tight end sets. That could muddy up the distribution of targets. And I think we'll see Aaron Jones stay heavily involved as a pass catcher as well. It doesn't really change our outlook for using him or not. He's obviously locked into lineups, but I think that's one adjustment that this team can make. Let's move on to the Lions. Let's talk about Kenny Golladay. He's questionable. He's been limited all week. It is a late afternoon kickoff, a 4:25 start between the Lions and Cardinals today. Brandon, do you have any reservations about starting Golladay if we do get the official green light later this afternoon that he is, in fact, good to go for this matchup?
Yeah, there's reservations. You only have to look back to week 2 in Julio Jones to see why you would have reservations. I mean, it's a tough injury, a hamstring to bounce back from. You don't want it to relapse at all. And so I think Kenny Golladay is going to be good for this Lions offense from a decoy standpoint, like how he could potentially be limited from a snap count, though. And I think individually for him could be a tough day, especially if he's drawing Patrick Peterson. But I think, his threat on the outside, I kind of like TJ Hawkinson for this reason. Talk about a guy that can help open up the middle and kind of divert attention. This should be good for TJ Hawkinson, the guys that live in the middle of the field for this lineup.
Now, we got that question from Peyton's Place. Is Jake Golladay or Ronald Jones in a half PPR situation? It's got to be Golladay, right?
Oh,
it's got to be make your own decision. I'm not sure. Look, I'm not like, this is one where like it's the snarkiness of years past, but I understand not everybody's been playing for years or understands this. But like, sometimes it's your decision. Here's the real answer about Julio, which we're going to talk about later once we get the official word from Inactives, and Golladay now. We know they have top 5 upside. Both of them. They have top 5 upside. We also, everything Brandon just said, everything you mentioned in the pre-setup for the question, they could be a decoy. They could be on a pitch count for snaps. They could come out early of aggravating the injury. The downside is a 0. The upside is top 5. Do you need that? Do you want to go with that? Then play that. If not, you take the safe options. As disgusting as Ronald Jones sounds, that's a safe option. So I hate to be like, oh, make your own decisions. But in this case, you do with your lineup. You just have to understand what you're dealing with.
I'm thinking about something that Brandon said kind of in passing a moment ago, too. Kenny Golladay might be a decoy today. And Marvin Jones has been pretty quiet with this temporary opportunity to step up as the number 1 receiver in Detroit. 8 for 78 and a TD on 14 targets in the first 2 games. Jake, is it wrong to like Jones more with Golladay on the field pulling away top coverage?
No, I think that you look at Jones and then, like, I'll give an example that I always go back to is like Anquan Boldin. Even in his best days, Anquan Boldin was always a great 1B, but when asked to be the 1A, succeeded sometimes, but he was always better when he had somebody on his level across from him. Now, Galladay's better than Marvin Jones, but he's also somebody that's kind of boosted by having a very nice talent alongside of him. I think you can make the case that Marvin Jones, first of all, Marvin Jones is definitively safer, but Marvin Jones, if Galladay's out there, even as a decoy, we could be looking at Marvin Jones as a top 15 play or result this week. So I think that Marvin Jones, if I had the choice between the two, I'm playing Marvin Jones.
Now, on the other side of this Lions-Cards matchup, Christian Kirk has a groin injury. He's been ruled out for this game. Jake, can you sell us on a viable Kirk replacement within the Arizona offense for this week?
There's only one, if you want to dig that deep. It's Andy Isabella, who had been seeing similar use to Christian Kirk so far. But I'm going to go back to something we've talked about before. It's very similar to the Texans. It's DeAndre Hopkins and then everybody else. And everybody else, not including the running backs, is somebody's going to hit some weeks, somebody's not. It's not always going to be the same person. If Kirk was out there, it might be Kirk, it might be Isabella, it might be Keyshawn Johnson if he was active, similar to like the Texans. It was Will Fuller. It was somebody else, and it was Kenny Stills sometimes. So somebody should, if you're taking the gamble on Isabella, if you're in a deep league, I would go Isabella, but I'm not trying to start Isabella.
It's fair. I think we're going to see him in some DFS tournament lineups, of course, given the makeup of that game and his price, of course. Let's move on to A.J. Brown. The knee injury he has is keeping him out again this week against the Vikings. That's an over-under that's been creeping up, so some sneaky shootout potential there. A little off the pace of some of the highest games on the board, of course. But, Brandon, I want to ask you, did the fantasy community whiff on Ryan Tannehill? 22.3 fantasy points per game last season, up over 25 through the first 2 weeks this season. The YPA, of course, back to normal after going over 9 last season, sitting at 7.3. But is he just better than we were giving him credit for coming off of last season?
He just fits in the system like a glove, apparently. I mean, I think I expected some regression to the mean, some negative regression. He was so hyperly efficient. But here he is a couple games in. He's got 6 touchdown passes without an interception. He makes the most of what he's afforded. But, they're never going to just chuck it. And when A.J. Brown is out, that lowers his ceiling as well. He's just going to have to continue to be highly efficient. And to me, he's still just a luxury backup quarterback for that reason. And if you're forced into having to use him, maybe you took Drew Brees and Ryan Tannehill. I would absolutely play Ryan Tannehill right now because, you mentioned it. He's been doing it. He's been doing it since a month into the season last year, consistently, week in and week out.
Jake, I got to ask you, you wrote earlier this week, the Vikings defense is horrible, and we saw last week it was kind of a 1A, 1B situation with Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith getting most of the targets. Is that where we're likely to go in this favorable matchup against Minnesota this week?
I think this is the same thing. And then Adam Humphries, of course, if you want to get involved with a third, half PPR, he had a lot of options last week. The real concern here is similar to what Brandon was saying, though, is you look at last year's playoffs. That's what we're worried about. That's why we're so worried about the Titans any given week, because any given week, he might attempt 12 passes, and he's remarkably efficient, that being Tannehill. But if he's attempting 12 passes, it might be only Jonnu. It might be only Corey Davis. Heck, it might be you don't want all three of them. So that's always the downside of the Titans' offense. And in a game like this, you have to think the Vikings know how terrible their defense has been. And what if this is a Dalvin Cook versus Derrick Henry game just all day long, and there's just not a lot of passing in general? Because Kirk Cousins has looked terrible. I'm not saying I'm fading a whole bunch here, but that's the downside of the Titans' offense any given week.
Yeah, that's definitely something I worry about too. Derrick Henry just sort of taking over and Tannehill throwing the ball 18 times because he doesn't have to throw it any more than that. Noah wants to know, will Corey Davis sustain his value once A.J. Brown returns from the knee injury. I'll throw this to you first, Jake, and I do owe you an apology because it was you who originally put out the Devontae Parker comp. I didn't know that. Beller mentioned that when I talked to Beller. He gave you credit, and I forgot he gave you credit about that. But nevertheless, how does Corey Davis look once A.J. Brown is back?
It's concerning. Unless A.J. Brown comes back and isn't 100% and Corey Davis takes over as the number one. Now, you go back to a conversation that I had with Brandon in the beginning of the season, which is I love Jonnu's talent. I'm very concerned about the volume. And that's we go back to this entire conversation we're having right now. The volume to supporting two people is pretty okay right now. I mean, it's getting Adam Humphries sprinkled in there, but nobody really gets that excited about Adam Humphries. You bring back A.J. Brown. If A.J. Brown's 100%, he is the number one. He is a number one talent. Let's be real about A.J. Brown. So now, who gets hit? It's got to be Corey Davis or Jonnu Smith. Like, somebody is going to take a hit. And I think if I'm going to lean between one of the two, Corey Davis falls aside a little easier than Jonnu Smith does, although I don't want to, just drop him or panic. But if you're talking about potential sell high, I would sell high on Corey Davis.
Yeah, I could see that, too. I mean, we're talking about this offense not being one that has enough volume to sustain all of those pass catchers. I think that's as much of a concern as Corey Davis's talent. I don't really have a lot of concerns about that. It's really been health and poor quarterback play probably that's held him back to this point in his career. We've got a few other notes, of course, with names scrolling by at the bottom of the screen. No George Kittle today for San Francisco. We'll talk in detail about that offense with Matt Barrows a little bit later on. No Tyrod Taylor again this week after he suffered a punctured lung. Justin Herbert making his second start for the Chargers. We've got Cam Akers out today again against the Bills, so we'll have more on the Rams running back situation in just a little while. We've got a couple of banged-up Patriots receivers who look like they're going to go. Julian Edelman and N'Keal Harry. We'll get more details on them, of course, in a few minutes. And then Jerry Jeudy, fully practiced Friday, should go against Tampa Bay later today, but we'll try to get more info on that if we can at some point later on this show. By the way, if you're watching us on a big screen, like Matthew D., who realized he can put this on his big screen as a pregame prep tool, send us a screenshot at The Athletic FS. We want to see it. Biggest screen wins. I don't know what the prize is, but you're going to win something. Let's get to a few more questions
from
here.
Your shelf there, DVR.
Anything off the shelf behind me. No, I learned a long time ago you can't just give things away. Like lawyers start to get involved, it gets really complicated. So it might just be a really nice pat on the back or extra questions answered or something that doesn't have any actual monetary value because we don't want to get the.
Oh, well, there you go. I have one extra large check the link shirt left. That has no monetary value.
Come on, you could get like $5 for it.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, let's get to a few listener and viewer questions here. Michael wants to know, another separated by 10 spots in Jake's rankings, but who has the highest ceiling and floor between Antonio Gibson and Jeff Wilson? We'll throw it to you first, Jake.
Oh, Gibson has the floor. Wilson has the ceiling. Wilson's 10 rushes for 20 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's what we're worried about when it comes to McKinnon's value. There's your ceiling right there is the 2 rushing touchdowns. But it's going to be 2 rushing touchdowns for the ceiling. I think Gibson's the play.
All right, let's go to you, Brandon. This question comes from Kyle. Pick 2.5 PPR league. Stephon Diggs, Kenny Golladay, Jerick McKinnon, and Antonio Gibson.
Would be enough for Golladay that he'll be limited, be a decoy. That there's something Jake mentioned all the potential pitfalls with him. I'm going to go Diggs, and I'm going to go McKinnon. He hasn't had a lot of volume in the first 2 games, but it should be there. Jeff Wilson will be involved, but McKinnon's flash for me. He looks. We haven't seen him in a couple of years, but he looks very healthy and very explosive, the guy that we kind of saw before he started going through all those injury problems.
All right, next one comes from Jacob. AP or Dion Lewis in a non-PPR league, Jake?
Dion Lewis. Swift is getting the most snaps. I know he isn't getting the most touches yet, but I think AP is just going to continue to get worked out more. I'm just going to go with Lewis. Freeman is surprisingly active today, but I don't think he's going to be involved much for the Giants.
Yeah, it's a really quick turnaround, and Lewis does enough where even if it's a split of carries, Lewis is going to be out there in most of the pass-catching situations.
Freeman said he wasn't even in game shape. Like, what are you doing, Freeman? You've been trying to get a contract and you're not in game shape?
What's he been going on all those visits for if he's not in game shape?
I don't know.
Kevin wants to know, did I just hear pivot to Marvin Jones if it were between him and Kenny Golladay? Wow. All right. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Jake, I think you said it though, right? Because Golladay has top 5 upside, and if you're looking at your projections on whatever game provider you're playing on, and you're a prohibited underdog, would you swing for the fences with Golladay? That's kind of like.
I think Jones is enough of a swing for the fence in this matchup.
Got Got a question here from Grady. Flex decision in a half PPR league. Hollywood Brown, Marvin Jones, and Antonio Gibson. It's got to be Hollywood Brown. Right, Brandon?
You're not going Hollywood Brown, Jake?
No,
Interesting. You're going to go Marvin Jones there.
I am.
Okay.
All right. Well, there's, tons of
You got to ask the question. You answer, though, Brandon. He asked you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Hollywood Brown. It's just so many more mouths to feed with the Lions passing game. I mean, if Galladay's truly out there, you got Hawkinson and Marvin Jones and DeAndre Swift's role is growing in that department. Look at it, in the Baltimore passing game, it's a much smaller amount of branches of guys that you're going to be using there, and Hollywood Brown's got that, blow the lid off.
They're super close.
Potential. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's a tough call based on expected usage. Kyron Kendrick wants to know Robert Woods or Jerick McKinnon in the flex spot, Jake.
Revenge game, which is a myth, by the way. McKinnon's the safe play. Woods if you need the upside. I actually think the Rams' passing offense is getting too much downgrade from people perspective-wise against the Bills' defense, which is good. Let's not be real about it. But is White going to shadow Kupp or Woods? I think that's the question. You would assume Woods, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily. So Woods if you need the boom bust. McKinnon's the guaranteed points.
Yeah, a lot of touches coming for McKinnon this week. Even with all those backups, I think San Francisco is going to move the ball pretty easily against that Giants defense this week.
You're assuming a lot for Shanahan. Watch JaMychal Hasty get 15 touches. Let's be real about Shanahan here.
I hope that's not the outcome. That would be extremely frustrating.
Because I just want to see this entire week in flames because I don't own this backfield anywhere.
Didn't you get enough brimstone and fire last week? Like, do you really need more destruction in week 3?
But this isn't injury related. This is just fun. This is just the misery laugh.
All right, you just want regular chaos, not injury chaos.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Let's get to some matchups and talk about some of the most added players of this week. We'll take a few more questions as we roll along throughout the show. Jake, according to your adjusted points allowed piece this week, the Bears and the Lions are among the teams with great quarterback matchups. So if you're looking at guys like Trubisky and Stafford, like how far do you go when you're looking at starting them in traditional one quarterback leagues?
See, I never go that far. So the beginning of the column says this is to make the tough start decisions that are closely ranked. This isn't to bench your stud for just some flyer. And, if you want to play that way, that's why I say you use it for DFS. That's why you're looking for the home run tournament plays. But in this case, we're talking about Stafford, and we're talking about Stafford even if Galladay is a decoy. I'm not going Trubisky unless it's DFS because Trubisky's outcomes, I think I have him around QB 18, 19, 20 this week off the top of my head. We know that's either, I said this to Brandon on Wednesday, we all laughed about it. That's too high or too low. Either Trubisky's going to be top 10 because he goes off, or he's going to be Trubisky and he's going to finish as QB 28. Like, that's who he is. So I'm starting Stafford. It's good to use the tool. It's already included in my rankings as part of the formula. So it's just for the close players if you need to make a difference.
And I think about it in terms of DFS, like you suggested, Trubisky's ownership roster rate is going to be so much lower than Stafford's. There's so much more interest in that Lions-Cardinals game by comparison. I think a lot of people are chasing the Atlanta side of that matchup against Chicago, and understandably, the Falcons are putting up a ton of points because they're allowing so many points. Let's take a look at the running back section of Jake's APA piece. Chargers, Eagles, Patriots among the teams that sort of popped this week. Brandon, the matchup is great with the Chargers facing the Panthers. Are you confident at this point, 2 weeks in the volume that we're seeing Joshua Kelly getting in this offense?
I am. I mean, he quickly established himself as that, the complementary role to Austin Eckler, and it's almost a straight platoon when it comes to, the rushing volume. And this is a team, and Anthony Lynn wants to be conservative, wants to really lean on the running game this year, given the quarterback situation. They have a good defense, and I think that's just what they've looked at as their secret to success is to be a conservative offense and play good defense. And if you look at the numbers, the running back rushes, they're by far and away the highest in the league. They average 36 running back rushes per game. I think there's 16 to 18 there for Joshua Kelly most weeks. And you get Carolina this week. I think Josh Kelly is a borderline top 20 running back play, and I feel very good about him this week.
It's wild to think that, though, because I drafted Joshua Kelly as basically the second half sort of lottery ticket, Austin Eckler fallback option if there was an injury. And here we are. Now here's a question with Joshua Kelly involved. This is from Corey. Ingram, Kelly, or OBJ in a full PPR league, Jake?
It's Kelly. Again, this is similar to from before, is if you really need the home run, it's with OBJ. It's Odell Beckham. But Odell Beckham, even a minute, don't expect great numbers from him this year. Now, if he's just trying to do a different version of the squeaky wheel, like, I don't know what that is. But, to go back to Kelly, is what Brandon said, too. I have him at 24, and a lot of people keep going, why do you have him so low? Why do you have him so low? And it's not even like I want Kelly higher, but if something goes wrong, like we expect this game to be the Chargers are okay. We expect them to run easy. But what if it goes sideways quickly? What if it is an Eckler game? The people right in front of him, Melvin Gordon, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, David Montgomery, James Robinson, who's already played, Mike Davis, and people can argue about some of those, but it just comes to the fact that lead options and Kareem Hunt versus Kelly being the backup. And I know he's getting the touches so far. It's always going to be tough for me to play the RB2 over the RB1 for a team.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about some of the other matchups here that popped on the running back side. The Eagles going up against the Bengals. Miles Sanders came back. They held nothing back with his workload. This is obviously a great spot for him. I think he's probably the most popular running back in DFS based on the price and the expectations for this week. Jake, is there really any way this goes sideways? I mean, this seems like just an absolute dream spot for Miles Sanders.
It does. It 100% does, but anything can go crazy any single week. I mean, we went into, again, Thursday night. I hate to keep referencing it, but the Dolphins just got blitzed by Josh Allen for that entire game. They've been one of the most susceptible to the passing game. Gardner Minshew just played two better defenses and went off on them. And yes, maybe we underrated the loss of DJ Chark, but things can go sideways any given week. As has been said, on paper, with Miles Sanders coming back and, as you said, no limitations, and against this defense, it should be Miles Sanders pushing for top 5 status this week. I feel comfortable. I'm starting him everywhere I could potentially find him. He's going to be super chalk in DFS, so that's maybe the only spot where you fade him is because he's going to be so chalk in DFS that if it goes wrong, now you're sitting pretty.
But an easy cash game staple if you're playing
yes,
this week.
Absolutely.
Like an
absolutely.
obvious lock at the price. I think that's the best way to look at him. Yeah, if you're playing in some big field tournaments, don't necessarily play
if you're playing in a Jock Market and he gets a touchdown in the first or second quarter, sell him just before, in case it's like they goes quiet for the rest of the game, they kind of chill out.
Yeah, I mean, I think when there's an obvious play like this, the game theory way my brain works is I want to do the opposite. I want to go Philly passing game. Miles Sanders and Carson Wentz and the pass catchers can all go off. If the Eagles put up 30-plus points this week, it could be a good week for everybody. And if the TDs aren't piled on Miles Sanders, if it's mostly yardage and like one TD, you can be fine. You could do an Ertz, Goddard, Wentz stack or even throw Djax in there, and everybody else is pissed and throwing things in their living room, and you're the one that comes away with all the points. So that's the chaos I root for, and that's how my brain works. So we're not that far apart in terms of just wanting weird stuff to happen. Let's talk about the Patriots backfield for a moment, Brandon. They also pop with a good matchup going up against the Raiders. Is there any way to leverage this New England backfield this week in this matchup?
Honestly, Rex Burkhead's not a terrible play. I mean, he is by far and away the snap count leader in this backfield. With James White being out, he's the guy they're going to lean on in the passing game out of the backfield as well. Sony Michel's kind of like a glorified Jordan Howard at this point. So the guy that has the versatility that's playing a lot and is going in the matchup against the Raiders defense is giving up a lot of fantasy points to the running back position, and the most receiving yards to the running back position is Rex Burkhead. If you were to plug him into the flex spot this week in your league, I don't think that's a terrible way to go.
Flex appeal for Rex Burkhead already in week 3. I thought that was going to be more of like a week 13 sort of thing after injuries and everything.
Sexy Rexy Flexy.
Yep.
Sexy Flexy Rexy.
I can't believe you're on board with this. I mean, it makes sense based on the matchups. Let's take a look at the wide receiver position for a moment. The Titans, we discussed them a little bit earlier with Jonnu and Corey Davis really having a large target share with A.J. Brown out. Jake, you kind of mentioned in passing Adam Humphries might be the third option there. What kinds of leagues do you think about playing him in? Is it going to have to be a full PPR where you got to start 3 receivers, or can it be a slightly more shallow league than that to actually justify using him?
No, that's probably where I'll go. The matchup helps, but yeah, it's full PPR, maybe half PPR, and it could be you're in a desperate situation. I'll give you a perfect example, like the Devonta Adams. Like, again, I don't think he plays tonight. I could be 100% wrong, and then everybody's going to be pissed at me if he does. But it's similar to Galladay's situation. It's like if you need, it's a full point PPR, Humphries is your 4th wide receiver or even your 3rd. You kind of roll him out there instead of waiting. I guess the only thing would be if you could get a Traquan Smith as your backup plan for Devonta Adams. But if your backup plan is worse than that, like what's like say Miles Boykin on Monday night, then just go ahead and play Humphries.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that Monday night game. I think everybody is, but I don't want to necessarily wait to throw Miles Boykin in there just because I was trying to get an unlikely player to play.
And I
into
love
my lineup.
Boykin.
Sure. I mean, someone's got to step up eventually as maybe the third option in that group. The 49ers have a good matchup against the Giants, but it's a wide receiver core that's absolutely decimated right now. It's kind of like looking at that New England backfield and hoping to find something good. Brandon, what are you doing with that San Francisco group of wide receivers this week?
Nothing. Staying away, avoiding at all costs. Look at Kendrick Bourne is probably the one that you would roll the dice on. He's had 5 targets in each game, but you have Nick Mullins now. He's averaging 50 yards. So there's 12 total receptions by the 49ers receivers, which is easily lowest in the league. If I'm playing anybody in this passing game, it's Jordan Reed, who we saw step up with a very nice 7-catch, 50 yards, 2 touchdowns last week. I think Jerick McKinnon will make some plays in the passing game as well. But, outside of a Hail Mary on Kendrick Bourne, I'm not digging any deeper.
Get some breaking news scrolling by as inactives are just starting to trickle in. You may have seen it go by at the bottom of your screen. Julio Jones is officially out. He was ruled inactive today by the Falcons. So let's talk about this situation for a moment. It really looked like he was up in the air coming to the weekend, so not a huge shock that he's out, but it's good that we have the official word now. Jake, we saw 21 targets go in the direction of Russell Gage in these first 2 games, 6 for 46 and a score on 9 targets last week. That's sort of where my baseline expectation is, with the TD sort of being the thing that either makes him good for the week or bad for the week. Without Julio Jones, though, I'm a little more interested. Is he a stream this week that is ordinarily more of a dart throw because of his limited role as the primary slot option there?
I think he's a solid play. I have him as a wide receiver 3 with Julio uncertain as of already, because why not at this point? Something Brandon said on the waiver show for the past 2 weeks is he's the one through the first 2 games, and Kevin Ridley are the ones that haven't been left out. Yeah, Julio got banged up last week, but week 1, Hurst was left out. Hurst comes back, and then Julio gets left out. Gage and Ridley have been involved in every single game. I don't think they'll do this, but my only concern would be, do they bump Gage out and then put like Zacchaeus in the slot? Or I'm trying to think maybe Blake, but I think maybe they push Blake outside. That would be my only concern, is do they ask Gage to do more than he can with no Julio? But as of right now, I'm still going to play him as a wide receiver 3. I think he needs to be pretty much, if you pick them up at this point, I find it hard to be able to bench him with no Julio.
Yeah, and maybe this is a moot point as sort of a follow-up question, though, Brandon. Behind Calvin Ridley, are we right to assume that Hayden Hurst is the second option in the passing game, or is that actually Gage? There's enough to go around to sustain 3 and possibly 4 pass catchers each week, especially if they're not going to get the running backs that involved in that facet. We haven't really seen a lot of Todd Gurley catching passes to this point. So what do you make of Hurst this week with Julio out of the equation?
Well, I think Hurst is a solid play, but to Jake's point, Gage has, as long as they're not going to mess with his role and they're going to keep him in the slot, then Gage is the number 2 guy behind Calvin Ridley. But look, this is an offense that, if you're the third guy, it's still going to be all right for you, because they're going to throw a lot, and maybe they don't have to throw quite as much as they have in the first 2 weeks against Chicago. Maybe this game will play out a little bit differently, but I still feel comfortable about any of the top 3s for the Atlanta offense in the passing game going into any week.
And so much of the love for this offense comes from the hate for the Atlanta defense and their inability to.
We don't hate the Atlanta defense. We love the Atlanta defense
for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, we love them, but they're legitimately bad, and this is going to just continue to prop up the value of this entire offense for the foreseeable future, which makes them a lot more fun. Getting a lot of great feedback. We were asking to see how you're watching this show. Show us your setup. Show us your TV. Show us the big screens. There's a nice shot of Jake. That looks like a 55-inch or so on the wall there. That's a nice looking screenshot. That's from Matthew. There's another one. Oh, and that's me really animated. Great timing there. That's about as animated as I've been in the first 3 weeks. So more of that. Bonus points if you get any one of us with our hands both up like that. I think that's
impressive. I don't know if I've ever seen that move from you, DVR.
the shrug emoji.
I must have missed that when you actually did it. Yeah.
I don't even remember doing that, so I must have just blacked out for 10 minutes earlier in the show and just, I don't know. Adrenaline kicked in for a little while, I guess. We'll get to a few more of those screenshots here in just a little while. But yeah, show us how you're watching the show. Keep sending us your questions too. Be sure to answer some of those as we roll along. Let's talk about some of the most added players for this week for a moment. Mike Davis, of course, kind of at the front of the list. Of course, Christian McCaffrey down for several weeks. Why is he only running back number 28 in PPR leagues on Fantasy Pros this week, Jake? Is that an under rank by the industry, or is that an appropriate placement given some of the other factors in play here? Maybe Curtis Samuel getting a bit more involved as a runner in the game plan this week.
Yeah, so I'm looking right now. I have Davis at RB16. I'm kind of curious, and I had a lot of people ask me, how do you have him so high? And I don't understand why people don't have him so high. The 8 receptions last week. Christian McCaffrey was in there for most of the game. It's not like Mike Davis did that from quarter 1 through the end. So Mike Davis is the guy. Mike Davis is somebody that people banged the table for when he was with the Bears and other opportunities before this. As Brandon knows, I think that he should be in the top 20. Maybe I'm a little bit too aggressive. I've talked about the Chargers' rush defense being better than people realize for what they did with Edwards-Helaire, but it's interesting because they give up one of the most yards before contact. They just make a lot of tackles on that first attempt, which now they have no Melvin Ingram, and they lost the other guy that my name's blanking on the other one. So maybe it's not as bad as people make it out to be. I talk about the workload before. You're telling me a perfect example. Let's go to Joshua Kelly. Joshua Kelly is the number 2. Mike Davis is the number 1. Who do I think is guaranteed to get touches? It's Mike Davis for me. Maybe I'm crazy.
I do like this matchup quite a bit. I love that he was catching a ton of passes last week, too, because that was the first part of that workload that you'd say, okay, he hasn't had a lot of opportunities in the past, but when he has played, that wasn't his specific function. It's not like a Chris Thompson scenario where he's the kind of back that's only out there for that. But he showed like they're going to use him that way, and I think that does kind of keep Samuel in much more of a complimentary role than some people would lead us to believe. So I'm really curious to see how that one plays out. If you're looking at him in a flex situation, are you playing him over like Golden Tate or even Traquan Smith? Like that's a pretty tough toss-up, I think, at this point. Traquan Smith versus Mike Davis in a flex spot. Like if you're in that situation, Brandon, where do you go?
I'm going to go Mike Davis because I think Traquan looked nice for a half, and then Drew Brees forgot about him. Stopped going to him. There's just, there's the questions right now with how good Drew Brees is at this point. But Jake mentioned it, like 8 catches from Mike Davis. He might be able to match what Traquan Smith does in the passing game, but then he also gets some rushing attempts as well. I mean, it'd be a little bit surprising if he was able to match his passing numbers, but this guy's going to be very actively involved. And he was in Seattle a couple of years ago and had a decent stretch where he was the guy because of injuries. And he is a very solid backup running back. He'll get what's given to him, and he's also really good in the passing game, and we saw that last week. So I expect that to continue, and for him to be a guy that's probably going to push 20 touches this week. So you want to follow that volume over Traquan.
Got a question right there on the screen from JDE Corsi. Half PPR, Davis versus Mark Ingram. That's actually a problem I have in flex, Jake. So what should I do in flex this week?
Are you facing me?
Yeah. No, I don't think I'm playing you this week.
I'm going Mike Davis. Like I would love to say Ingram. This is a matchup that we think should be 30s on both sides of the scoreboard. But as we've seen so far with Mark Ingram, other people are getting involved. If they're up early, they're going to get involved. If they're not and they're behind, J.K. Dobbins is getting involved. Like you just don't know with that backfield. I know Mike Davis is the lead guy. I guess I'm dying on the Davis hill this week.
Eric wants to know chance of a Mike Davis dud. I think given that Jake's going to die on that hill, we should probably throw this question to Brandon. I mean, how could it go wrong, really? If
I thought you were going to say, since I'm dying on the hill, it's like 85% now.
Well, yeah, that's probably true. So I'll let Brandon kind of confirm that. Do you think because Jake is all in on Mike Davis that it has to go wrong because of the curse of Jake?
No, I would like to say there's such a thing, but I'm not really that superstitious that Jake is affecting fantasy outcomes in that way. How could it go wrong? I don't know that it could, because like we just talked about with him, he's versatile enough that no matter what the game script is, he can be involved. If it's a close game and they want to churn clock and they want to keep it tight and it's a war of attrition, then Mike Davis can be there and be that guy. If it's, if they're chasing the scoreboard, then Mike Davis can be used in the passing game. So I'm not sure how it can go wrong. I mean, just not scoring at all, the Chargers defense completely shutting down this offense. That's how it could go wrong. But certainly the Chargers losing Melvin Ingram, one of the guys that's one of the better ones in the league at forcing pressure on the quarterback. That's just another feather in Carolina's and Mike Davis's cap this week.
Yeah, really low over-under in that game, 43.5. I kind of think that one could sneak over. I like the offenses both in this spot. Diego has a question, Mike Davis or Joe Mixon? So this is kind of a how high are you really going to go with Mike Davis sort of question, Jake.
I have him back to back, so I guess like I do. I have Davis honestly one spot in front of Mixon, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, really?" And but the thing with Mixon, my biggest concern for him is that if they get into their fast-paced offense, 2-minute offense, whatever it might be, it's their no huddle version offense. It's Geo. And that's my biggest concern. I love Mixon. And we saw at the beginning of last week's game, and I know it's a long time ago because it was Thursday night, people forgot, but he was used in the passing game. It was like that volume was there, and then all of a sudden they go fast-paced, and it's like, well, he looked great, but let's go back to Geo. So I'm going to give Davis the slight edge, but it's definitely hard to bench Mixon. I mean, I guess, Brandon, you can break the tie.
Oh, I was going to actually just weigh in and say, just not that you need a sanity check, but I'm just looking at my rankings. I have Mike Davis 17th and Joe Mixon 18th. So I have him back to back for both of us, with Mike Davis leading that one as well. And all the things Jake said, I feel the same as well. Like, it would be hard to bench Joe Mixon.
This feels like the Kenyon Drake when he was in Miami. Like, stop screwing around with Joe Mixon and just give him the touches.
Yeah. Well, he's getting touches. You're right, though, but he's losing some valuable ones for sure.
Right.
We got some more inactives related news. The good news is both Darren Waller and Josh Jacobs are going to play, but the Raiders are saying that Josh Jacobs is not 100%. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, the workload's usually so big that you'd never even think about sitting him down. You have to be in a pretty shallow league to actually bench Josh Jacobs, wouldn't you, Jake?
I would think you would have to be. This isn't like a Galladay type of situation where he could be on limited touch count or limited target count, limited snap count, whatever you want to say there. Josh Jacobs is going to be involved. Maybe it's not the volume that we've seen. And one thing so far is, as excited we've been, it's been a little bit volume-based. So maybe you put him in the RB2 discussion, but I find it hard to bench him because what do we know about Belichick and what do we expect to happen in this game? Darren Waller's been their best weapon so far. There is no Ruggs, so Stephon Gilmore's just going to take Edwards out of the conversation unless they bring him over to Waller, because Edwards' biggest issue is going against top corners as a rookie, and that's why he's been non-existent so far. So you would say Belichick and taking away the best player so far would be like Waller in the passing game, and that let a banged-up Jacobs try to beat them. But I still don't know how you necessarily bench Jacobs unless you're just loaded with running back options.
Can I just weigh in on that really quickly? And the one thing we know about Josh Jacobs, he played like half of last year with a shoulder blade fracture. If you watch the Monday night game, he was hurt kind of early in that game, went out a couple times, came back in. Like, this guy is an absolute warrior. So, like, I think if he's going to play, like, I think you don't have to worry about him kind of checking out in this game at some point, as you might with some other players. Like, the guy's an absolute warrior. He'll play through the injury and he'll play effectively. He's done it on multiple occasions in the past.
Yeah, he did play very banged up down the stretch last season. A couple other inactive news items to pass along. Duke Johnson officially inactive, so it could be another heavy workload for David Johnson in that Houston backfield. Denzel Ward will go for Cleveland today, so just kind of a matchup related note for the Browns as they go up against Washington here in week 3. Let's talk about Darrell Henderson for a second. He's just outside of Jake's top 20 at the running back position for this week. Not that far away from Mike Davis. And maybe that's the kind of guy you are thinking about playing over, a Mixon, possibly a dinged up Jacobs. I wouldn't go that far, but what's the pie in the sky sort of expectation for Darrell Henderson? Because this Rams backfield has been a mess. Cam Akers is hurt right now. How do you see things playing out in week 3 and even beyond with Henderson? Clearly you like him this week, but is he someone that you expect to see at this part of your rankings or higher when we get to week 7, week 8, week 9 of this season?
If we can get the free Henderson or free Hendo or free Darrell or whatever you want to call it, we need to free him, because the one thing Emery and I were texting about, and it's understandable when you don't know, like, what is a home run play at median or running back? I mean, you can say that about anybody when they break free, but Henderson has that breakaway ability, and if you want the metric side of it, and this is what I mentioned in my rankings column this week, is it's strange that people will see the Bills and say, oh no, the Bills are a terrible matchup. The Bills are top 3 in allowing yards after contact and broken tackle percentage, which means they're not securing the tackles. Like, people aren't having great success, but once they get the ball in the hands, they are. And so you talk about Henderson versus Brown as running back styles. Brown is somebody who will run through contact, which is good for him too, but he's also somebody that runs up the middle a lot more. Henderson's somebody that slips a tackle and then he adds another 30 yards. So I think Henderson, it's funny, I got texted by my buddy this morning. He's like, do I play Brown or Henderson? And I said, I feel Brown is safer, but I'm just going for Henderson. It's the talent versus Brown that's better. It's the breakaway ability that's better. I just think that Henderson could have his breakout game this week, and then we're potentially looking at this as his backfield with other guys mixed in.
Porter chimes in with hi. I'll say hi to Porter as well, although we have not met in real life. But happy to have everybody tuning in today. Keep those questions coming, but a few more of those in just a little while. As Darrell Henderson goes, Brandon, do you share the love that Jake has for him? Do you look at him as someone that can continue to play at a high level and take over this backfield perhaps?
I don't think he'll fully take over again. Like Cam Akers, they haven't even begun to tap into what he could potentially be, and it will behoove them, and they will definitely make sure they try to do that at some point. I think what could happen is that Malcolm Brown could just fade back to being the wallflower backup that he's been in his career, and that Darrell Henderson and Cam Akers could form a pretty potent, platoon backfield. And one thing that we've seen so far is this Rams offensive line, at least in terms of run blocking, and has looked worlds better than they looked last year. Looks like they got things fixed up front. And so could Darrell Henderson be a guy that gets, 10 carries a week, but also is leading in the passing game out of the backfield? I think that's kind of what he could settle into. And both of these guys could be very viable in an RB2/flex weekly kind of consistent plays sort of deal. But I'm certainly not out on Cam Akers long-term, but I'm more in on Darrell Henderson being a part of that than I was coming into the season. I kind of poo-pooed that idea that this would just end up being Akers all the time, and that's certainly not going to be the case.
Now we got a question there from David on screen. Darrell Henderson, Josh Kelly, or David Johnson in a full PPR league this week. Brandon, we'll throw it to you first.
Well, I like actually Darrell Henderson a little bit more, and it's because we don't have Cam Akers. There's also Malcolm Brown with the finger injury. That, I have a feeling in the back of Sean McVay's mind, that's thinking he's worried about ball security a little bit more than usual with Malcolm Brown. So we could see Darrell Henderson get one of his biggest workloads of the year today.
Trade one. I don't know, just so you don't have to deal with this frustration. Like I do. I have Henderson 1, Kelly 2, and then David Johnson. The funny thing is David Johnson. It's funny. I don't like him this week, and somebody was trying to well, how do you not like him this week, and then you put him as a buy low? Well, because the schedule gets easier after this week, and he's getting 90 to 95% of the opportunities. That's why he's a buy low. But you can also not like him for this particular matchup.
Yeah, Duke Johnson's out, so it's all David Johnson, but it is the Steelers, as Jake is talking about there.
I know that Steelers defense is really good, but I think those offenses are both good enough to just put up a lot of points. I think there's a little bit of sneaky shootout potential in that Steelers-Texans game. Am I crazy for believing that Houston can actually score a bit against Pittsburgh, Jake?
No, you're not crazy at all, but it's just really, is it going to be Deshaun Watson himself? Deshaun Watson hasn't even really got running as much as he has been in the past. That's a concern. It's similar to Cam Newton. It's like when they get down there, is it going to be David Johnson or is Deshaun Watson going to take a sneak in or roll out himself? I definitely think Houston can. It's a big part of it's going to be, too, is how healthy is Will Fuller, which is always a question every single week.
Well, and we also just saw Houston play another similarly tough defense in Baltimore, and David Johnson was, 50 total yards from scrimmage and no touchdowns. So that's kind of what we have fresh in our minds when we're looking at David Johnson and his upside in this contest as well. We just saw another really good defense kind of shut them down.
Let's get to a few more questions here before we say goodbye to Jake. And from that point on, of course, we'll squeeze a few more in. But the default check the link line is coming real soon. Logan wants to know, Zach Ertz or Jonnu Smith in a half-point PPR league, Jake?
Check the link. There you go. Now, it's Zach Ertz. I love Jonnu for the excitement with no A.J. Brown, but how do you not like Zach Ertz, especially with Rager getting put back on the IR?
Denny wants to know, Kareem Hunt or T.Y. Hilton in a PPR league, Brandon?
I will go Kareem Hunt. It's been 2 solid weeks for him. He's the kind of guy that no matter what the game script, he's going to be involved. The game script could potentially hurt Nick Chubb, but I don't think there's one out there that hurts Kareem Hunt. So I'm expect him to continue to keep putting up production.
All right, Jesse wants to know, pick 2 of Kenny Golladay, Keenan Allen, and Julian Edelman in a half-point PPR league.
And that's one where you don't even need to risk Golladay there, especially with Herbert back or at quarterback again this week. He targeted Keenan Allen a lot more, as we saw. So I don't think you even need to screw around and mess with Golladay when you have wide receiver options like that.
Yeah, I think that's taking on a lot of risk because there is that decoy potential aside from the fact that he could just be ruled out later this afternoon after players are locked in. It's nice to have Allen playing in a late game, though, too, because at least you'll have the opportunity to pivot if you need to. Miles wants to know, can you justify playing a tight end at flex? He's got TJ Hawkinson, Swift, Judy, and Gage to choose from. How about you, Brandon? What do you think?
I mean, I think you can justify. I like TJ Hawkinson this week, and I actually have him in a couple one-and-done leagues where you choose on 1 week, and I've chosen Hawkinson this week. But I think Russell Gage, again, assuming that they're not going to change his role and where he's lining up and that he's still going to be the inside guy there, I think Russell Gage is a little bit safer. So I'd probably, in my flex spot, put Russell Gage this week.
All right, last question here. This comes from Milena. Russell Gage or John Brown, Jake?
Still going John Brown. I think this is a toss-up, and if you want to go with Gage, I'm fine with it. But John Brown has proven he can be the number 2 when the defensive attention is on the number 2. And the great thing about it so far this year is he's been feasting on number 2 corners. I know the Rams are a little bit more concerning, but, I mean, if you're talking about Gage versus Brown and who's more proven, who can play outside and who can do more, I'm going to go with Brown.
It's a great prove-it game, really, for both of these teams. Rams-Bills, kind of an exciting game as part of that early block today. It is time for us to say goodbye to Jake. So, Jake, be sure to check in.
Bye,
if you don't like something we're saying, we know you're always lurking in the background as you're updating as you're updating the rankings. Feel free to chime in. But looking forward to enjoying some week 3 with you over the next couple of hours here.
What did I think of the last episode of the best episode of the season?
Best episode of the season so far. Absolutely. If you want to get Jake's updated rankings, which he's going to work on right now, theathletic.com/cheat sheet. Sign up for just $1 a month. It gets you all the stuff during the week, too. So you get the fresh rankings when they come out. You get waiver stuff. You get the APA that we talked about before. And then, you can ask Jake a million questions because that's his absolute favorite. Let's move on to talk about Jock Market here for week 3. And to do that, we bring on Michael Beller. Jock Market, of course, you can get in the App Store, Android coming soon. You can start making money. Download that app this week. Now, we're looking for a certain thing on Jock Market each and every week, Beller. We're looking for an undervalued or series of undervalued quality players, right? Guys that are buried a little bit in the ranks who could pop up and be top 5 players this week. That's where the payouts are at. So I got to ask, who do you like this week? Who sort of fits that bill for you?
First guy who came to mind for me, and I went and looked and had a feeling he was going to be underpriced to at least start things off. We'll see where the bid climbs to by time games kick off, but Allen Robinson for me was the first obvious guy to go to. Has not had any big statistical games just yet this season. He has had 9 targets in both of those Bears victories, and this game today against Atlanta really should be a fertile ground for him to finally have that first big game in 2020. We know how bad this Atlanta defense has been all season. We know what sort of matchup this is for the entire Bears passing game. And then A.J. Terrell, who would have been on Allen Robinson for most of the afternoon, he is out for today's game. So there really is no one standing in between Allen Robinson and a big game, I guess, unless you want to point to Mitch Trubisky and his inconsistency. But I think this is the day that we were hoping for from Allen Robinson the first 2 weeks of the season. I've already bet his over-under, which is 65.5 yards. I think that is way over. I've got some bids in on the IPO for him as well, so I'm hoping mine hold because I think we're going to see a big game out of Allen Robinson. And even without Julio Jones, I think this game can get up and down the field, so I wouldn't be fading this game just because Julio's out.
I really hate to agree with you about the Bears anytime they come up, but this is another good spot for them. The schedule's been very kind to the Bears to begin this 2020 season. Let's talk about a quarterback. I'm surprised that you want to talk about Tom Brady. I'm kind of underwhelmed. I mean, I know Mike Evans was banged up in week 1. They didn't have Chris Godwin in week 2. Both will be out there this week. I think my concern is the matchup. I think the Bucs just kind of get up and run the ball a lot against Denver, but what do you like about Brady?
Yeah, it's the fact that he's got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin at 100% for the first time this season. Mike Evans did play in week 1, but he barely practiced that week, and he was not used the way that we would typically expect Mike Evans to be used in that game. He gets healthy for week 2, and then you've got Chris Godwin in concussion protocol missing that game. So for the first time this season, Tom Brady has the two guys who made us really excited about his move to Tampa. Tom Brady was the QB 12 last year for the full season in New England with no athleticism and no speed on the outside. He goes to a completely different situation with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and we just haven't got to see that play to script yet this year. So I understand the game script concerns that there might be in this game, but we're still talking about Bruce Arians. We're still talking about a guy who said we don't throw the ball to tight ends 50 times because that's what we have receivers for. And now he actually gets to use Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Tom Brady the way that he was dreaming about since March for the first time this season. I think we see pedal to the metal from this passing game, and we finally see a big game out of Tom Brady as well here in week 3.
Now, we talked about the Packers-Saints matchup at the very beginning of the show. Over-under still high there at 53, even with Michael Thomas ruled out, even with Devonta Adams on the other side listed as doubtful and seemingly very unlikely to play. What are you doing with the Saints offense on Jock Market this week?
Yeah, I like the under in this game of 53. I think that it's a game that just can't get to that point, especially when you consider how good New Orleans can be on defense. But there's still plenty of room for this game to go under and Alvin Kamara to have himself a monster performance. We got our first good look at what this team's going to want to do without Michael Thomas last week. And what is it going to do? It's going to have a whole lot of Alvin Kamara involved. 13 carries, 79 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Also got 9 targets, caught all 9 of them for 95 yards. That is the sort of stat line that makes Alvin Kamara so intriguing week in and week out. And with Michael Thomas off the board for the Saints, I think we still continue to see Alvin Kamara as, maybe the number 1 receiver on this team too. Obviously, Jared Cook's going to be involved. Tre'Quan Smith had himself a nice game last week, even though he went dark in the second half. He's going to be involved to the extent that he was last week, and maybe even a little bit beyond that. But you're looking at a guy in Alvin Kamara who could very legitimately be his team's number 1 running back and number 1 pass catcher for the duration of Mike Thomas's absence. So I do think that we see another big game out of Alvin Kamara. And something else I like about him from a week ago that could carry over to this week, just 3 carries for Latavius Murray in that game against the Raiders in week 2. So it is not as though they feel they need to take away from Alvin Kamara's rushing load to get him more involved in the passing game. I see an easy 20-plus touches for him in this game tonight against Green Bay. And hey, under 53 could still be 47 or 51. There's still plenty of room for points in that game. It doesn't have to go surging past the way that we would normally expect when these two teams get together. So I think another big night in store for Alvin Kamara.
Now, I've been trying to get shares of Joe Mixon during this conversation, tried to get him as an IPO, didn't bid enough. I think Mixon's sneaky this week across the board, DFS, Jock Market, anywhere. And I think the reason for this is the Bengals need to find a way to take a little pressure off of Joe Burrow. Obviously, the script in week 2 with the attempts is not what you want, no matter how good you think Joe Burrow is going to be. And I think he's going to be fantastic. We're still seeing Mixon get a lot of volume. He just hasn't done a lot with it. Do you think this is a spot where he can pretty quietly get back on track against the Eagles this week?
Yeah, I do. I actually like the Bengals quite a bit in that game. You're seeing them come off at 4.5, 5.5, anywhere in there as underdogs. And I like the Bengals in this spot. I think this might be the week where the national media squares itself with the fact that the Eagles might not be very good this season. But I do think that they got to get Mixon more involved in the passing game. That's the one thing that would have me concerned is now this is year after year after year where they don't seem to want to make him into a Alvin Kamara usage type. And we're seeing it from the Raiders, right, with Josh Jacobs, getting him more involved. And we just haven't seen the Bengals go that full measure. They still want Giovanni Bernard involved in the passing game in some way, which is understandable. We would love to see Mixon get a little bit more unleashed. But I do think that the price is still coming in at a point where you can go in on him and get some pretty nice payoff. I like Joe Burrow, too. I think that this is going to be a game where the Bengals end up putting up a lot of points. And what you like from Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor from a week ago is that there's no kid gloves on Joe Burrow whatsoever. That game against Cleveland was never totally out of hand, even though Cleveland had a couple of multiple scored leads in that game. It was still always within arm's reach for the Bengals, and you didn't see them take the foot off the gas at all. 61 pass attempts for Joe Burrow in that game. So Zach Taylor already has a ton of trust in his rookie quarterback, and I would not be surprised to see that come to fruition again here in week 3. So I do like Joe Burrow too. Tom Brady and Joe Burrow, probably my 2 favorite quarterback targets in the jock market context, where you're looking for guys who can really outperform what a buying share price might be when games kick off.
Yeah, one other running back that I'm interested in this week, Chris Carson. I think the share price is right around $5. IPOs just closed there. I like Carson because I think the week 1 volume was an anomaly. I think most weeks he's going to get 18 to 20 carries. He's been catching more passes going back to last season, and that game has shootout potential written all over it with the Cowboys and Seahawks going at it. That looks like an absolute perfect spot for Chris Carson when everybody else is chasing Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. That's going to be, I think, a really fun game. We always get so concerned about games that we expect to be high scoring, not totally playing to script. But if you've watched the first 2 games of either of those teams, let alone both of them this season, you have seen 2 offenses that can pretty much do what they want to do exactly what they were designed to do coming into the season. And then, I'm not a big fan of that comment, Derek W. And then the defenses have done absolutely nothing to slow down the offenses that they've played. I don't see why. We would have to be almost wish casting to think that that wasn't going to happen again in this game. So Chris Carson, I agree with you, DVR, a great way to look at it, an excellent pivot off of where people are going to most want to get involved with Seattle, understandably, with Russell Wilson and that passing game. And if you do look for even a little bit of bonus there, Chris Carson has been more involved in the passing game over these first 2 weeks than we're used to seeing from him as well. So Chris Carson, I think, really everyone in that game, it should be all systems go. I don't think we're going to see much of a disappointment from anyone involved in Seahawks-Cowboys.
Look, I'm on team let Russ cook. I just think Chris Carson is being overlooked right now because this
at least
whole
let him be a
offense
sous
is at a
chef,
high
right?
level.
At least let Chris Carson be a sous chef.
Yeah, he's
at
capable.
the very least.
Yeah, he could prepare the mise en place and get everything ready to go. Be sure to take control of your fantasy sports experience. Download the Jock Market app now in the App Store. Again, the Android app is coming soon, but it turns daily fantasy sports into a stock market. Jock Market is awesome. Be sure to check it out today. We're going to have Matt Barrows joining us to talk about the San Francisco 49ers. This team has been so banged up this season, and yet here we are with a matchup in week 3 where it looks like they could actually come in and possibly get yet another win. Matt, thanks for taking some time to join us today to talk about what might be the NFL's most cursed team. I don't think I realized how bad it was. I was listening to your podcast, and they had trouble leaving the airport last week.
They had trouble leaving the airport. Their plane got hit on the tarmac. They had to get a different plane going out of San Jose, and it didn't arrive in New Jersey until something like 2:30 in the morning. And then after the Jets game, they're staying at the Greenbrier, a resort in West Virginia. And so they realized that they have a lot of injuries coming out of the Jets game, and that they arranged to have an MRI truck come out to the resort. Well, the MRI truck broke down and it never arrived. So they had to go sort of far afield to various hospitals in Virginia, in West Virginia, in order to get 7 MRIs done after that game. So they are banged up. They were unlucky last year. And so one of the storylines coming out of last season and throughout this past offseason was, well, the luck can't be any worse than it was last year. But it is, and it already is coming out of week 2.
I think 2020 has taught us never tempt fate. Things can always get worse. Let's start with George Kittle. He returned to practice this week in a limited capacity. He's out again today, but do you think he's back in week 4?
I do. I think that if today's game was being played at Levi Stadium or on a grass surface, you might see George Kittle. But the fact that he's still a bit of a maybe, plus the fact that the 49ers do not trust that MetLife playing surface meant that he wasn't going to play today. I'd say Jordan Reed could have a big game fantasy-wise, but George Kittle probably week 4 against the Eagles.
Yeah, Jordan Reed was outstanding last week. Looking at this group of pass catchers, is he clearly the first option through the air right now, or do you see one of the receivers possibly stepping up to push 6, 7, 8 targets maybe with Nick Mullins at quarterback this week?
Yeah, Kendrick Bourne and Mullins had a good rapport going at the end of the 2018 season. That was the the year that Mullins started the last 8 games. So he's a possibility. And then the other receiver I would point out is Jerick McKinnon, who Shanahan brought in as basically a receiver out of the backfield. Had his whole 2018 offense sort of tailored around McKinnon, and then McKinnon at the last second, right before their week 1 game that year, tore his ACL, and he's been out ever since. So you saw Mullins throwing a lot to Matt Breida, running back, in the second half of 2018. I wonder whether McKinnon can sort of resurrect that role. A better receiver than Breida was in 2018 for sure. And that seems like a plausible solution to all the 49ers injuries.
Yeah, how much do you expect the game plan to be adjusted with Mullins under center this week? At the very least, he seems like a capable backup, if not something a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, size and arm strength were his 2 knocks coming out in the draft in 2017, and he wasn't drafted. And he said this week that he's really worked on the arm strength portion of it. He's worked out with Tom House and other kind of throwing mechanics gurus. And he says that his arm is stronger than it was in 2018. I'm not sure. I saw that watching practices in August, but he's confident in it. Point being that he didn't exactly spread the ball around when he was the starter in 2018. Most of the passes were shorter, intermediate, over the middle stuff, which is what the Shanahan offense is based off of. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, Shanahan is very good at tailoring his offense around injuries. He did that last year very well. So I would say a lot of over the middle stuff. Like I said, a lot of stuff to the running back, tight end. Kendrick Bourne does his damage in the middle of the field. That's where I see this passing offense going.
No Raheem Mostert this week in the backfield. So how should we expect the workload to be divided up? Clearly, McKinnon's going to have a significant role, but should we consider Jeff Wilson? Should we consider JaMychal Hasty? Like, is there a chance that Kyle Shanahan channels his father and wreaks havoc on fantasy owners in week 3 with his running backs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a very plausible scenario where Jerick McKinnon gets the lion's share of the snaps at running back, but Jeff Wilson has more fantasy points because Jeff Wilson is more power back. He's the guy that they're going to put in on, first and goal. So he could end up with 26 yards and 2 touchdowns or something to that effect. And he's good out of the backfield too. He doesn't have the speed and sort of the one cut dynamic that Shanahan, Mike, and Kyle Shanahan running backs are known for. But he's been really reliable when they put him in games. And his first down / touchdown to carry ratio is really good. So he would be a very sneaky pick, maybe a brilliant pick. I just don't see a lot of scoring going on in this game. But Jeff Wilson, if the 49ers score 3 touchdowns, Jeff Wilson could easily get 2 of those.
Yeah, I think that's the nightmare scenario for everybody starting Jerick McKinnon this week, is that Wilson could swoop in and get those valuable TDs. One last question for you before we let you go, Matt. Deebo Samuel, is he making progress? Could we see him possibly in week 4 as his team continues to get healthy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at one point, Kyle Shanahan was saying that Deebo Samuel was a possibility for week 1. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and then they stashed him on IR. That may have been more of a strategic move. I don't think that they thought initially that a guy who suffered his injury in June was eligible for this 3-week IR. So once they realized he was, they took advantage of that, and that got them through 2 games at MetLife Field, which, for a guy coming off of a foot injury, I think played a big role in the decision. Again, just like George Kittle, going back to grass, going back to Levi Stadium, which a few years ago, by the way, that was the field that you didn't want to play on. That was the dangerous field in the NFL. Now Levi Stadium is one of the best. I would say a very good chance for both Kittle and Deebo Samuel, and maybe Jimmy Garoppolo in week 4 against the Eagles. And, that gives them a little bit of boost, brings some good injury news to a season that started off with really rotten injury news.
says a lot about the faith of Vegas in this coaching staff and this roster. The Niners are still 3.5-point favorites with all of these injuries they're dealing with, and they're on the road, no less, against the Giants team that's banged up and, of course, struggling defensively as well. Matt, enjoy week 3. Thank you for making some time for us this morning.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
It's Matt Barrows. He covers the Niners for The Athletic. And get all of Matt's written coverage, all of our fantasy football content, including Jake's rankings, for just $1 a month at theathletic.com/cheat sheet. And be sure to check out Matt's 49ers podcast called Here's the Catch with David Lombardi and Dennis Brown. Let's bring back Michael Beller. Let's bring back Brandon Funston. We're going to take a few more questions here. First one comes from Levon. Let's go Djax, Tyler Boyd, Traquan Smith, N'Keal Harry, Keenan Allen. Choose 2 from that group. Let's go to you first, Beller.
I'm definitely going to put Keenan Allen into that starting lineup there. I love the Justin Herbert start for him. And, hey, we know Justin Herbert now going to be starting in week 4, too, at least. So he's definitely got a chance to hold on to this job. So I'm putting Keenan Allen in there. And I'll go Tyler Boyd as well. I was just talking so much up about the Cincinnati Bengals today against the Philadelphia Eagles. I really do like that offense. I think we see another nice game out of them here. Plenty of opportunity for Tyler Boyd in it. Those would be the 2 guys who I would go with out of that quintet.
All right, next question comes from Walt. Let's go to you, Brandon, answering by candlelight. Thoughts on Leonard Fournette?
Whoa, yeah, well, I don't know what happened there. I guess we got some sunshine coming through my office window here. I like Leonard Fournette. We talked about this during the week on our podcast that Bruce Arians took the first opportunity he could to bench Ronald Jones, and that was a fumble that may or may not have been his fault. It could have been Tom Brady's fault. It could have been a combination of the two. But once that happened last week, Leonard Fournette came in and they didn't look back, and he was the guy. And I kind of feel like this depth chart has changed. Leonard Fournette's moved to the front, and I think that's going to be the case going forward. And he's going to put further and further distance with Ronald Jones. So I have him as a solid RB2 this week against the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, my trust level is pretty high with Leonard Fournette, despite the weirdness in week 1. I think that Jones fumble was sort of a turning point in that backfield that was probably going to happen anyway. Creston wants to know, start CeeDee Lamb or Tyler Boyd this week, Beller?
I am firing up CeeDee Lamb with a ton of confidence. You guys, I think all 3 of these Dallas receivers are start-worthy week in, week out. I think you're going to be looking at all 3 of them as default top 30 receivers every single week. And I think this week in particular, given the matchup with Seattle and what we expect there, I think you could say that all 3 of these guys in Dallas are top 24 receivers. But CeeDee Lamb, I would be thinking that he might be second on that team in targets. In our beat writer roundtable this week, John Machota, our Cowboys beat writer, said that he does think that by the end of the season, we're going to be calling Amari Cooper the wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lamb the wide receiver 2, at least in terms of targets in Dallas. He has just hit the ground running in his rookie year, and you love the matchup problems that he creates for opposing defenses. So I do like Tyler Boyd, but man, I think it's very hard to sit CeeDee Lamb this week. If I have to bench one, I'm benching Boyd. I'm keeping Lamb in there.
Yeah, it's a really tough call, just given that Boyd should have a higher target floor, but the quality of those targets is quite a bit different right now in Cincinnati. Let's talk about some start or stash options and go to the 2-quarterback league mindset for a moment. Dwayne Haskins is a guy that I think across our podcast universe and on this show, we generally like. We believe in him long term, thanks in large part to our guy Emery Hunt. His faith in Dwayne Haskins has become our collective faith in Dwayne Haskins. It's really not a great situation. That was my one reservation about him all along. But if you're in a super flex situation, Brandon, are you still throwing Dwayne Haskins out there each and every week, expecting some growth, expecting some progress week over week?
Well, it depends on how deep your super flex league is. If it's a 12-team league, you're talking 24 quarterbacks, and he's very likely to be the 3rd quarterback for somebody's roster. And I'm not throwing him out there because he's giving you, right around 200 yards and 1 touchdown a week. And that's, unlikely to be. It's a 28th overall quarterback right now. So it's not really, optimal for your 2nd quarterback in the super flex league in that setup. But that said, I mean, he's still giving you that kind of production in a deeper league. That's going to be better than what you're likely to be able to put in as a flex guy that's either, a running back, a wide receiver, or whatever. So expect him to get better. And what you have so far in deeper leagues is still good enough to put in a super flex spot just because of the quarterback scoring.
I wonder if we'll ever reach a point in this season where Dwayne Haskins is more than a waiver streamer for a really good matchup in a single quarterback league. But I would hold him in a 2-quarterback league unless it's as small as Brandon mentioned. If it's like a 10-team league, maybe he's fringy there because teams don't necessarily hold 3 quarterbacks in leagues like that. Let's move on to a running back situation. Malcolm Brown, kind of the backup to Darrell Henderson right now. Cam Akers has the rib injury. Is he still worth holding on to? Is he even startable in some leagues, Beller? What's the sort of cutoff for actually using Malcolm Brown in a league this week?
Yeah, definitely holding him. You're not letting him go for sure because this Rams running back situation is going to be fluid, and I am on record as being very confident in Darrell Henderson moving forward. But just because I'm confident doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to be right about that. I am absolutely holding Malcolm Brown. I would have trouble starting him this week. I think Brandon made a good point a little earlier in the show. Even though that broken pinky isn't anything that needs to cost Malcolm Brown time, it could be weighing on Sean McVay's mind in a ball security sort of way. So you couple that with the fact that Darrell Henderson played really, really well last week. He has that breakaway ability that we talked about earlier. And also, just go back 1 year and think about how excited this team was about Darrell Henderson. And he never was able to put things together because of health a season ago. Now he really does have a chance to, maybe not totally run away with the job because of Cam Akers, but cement himself as a week in, week out consistent piece of this offense. And all of that works to Malcolm Brown's detriment. So I am holding on to him in a 12-team PPR league. I'm not starting him most likely in a vacuum this week. I would have to be in a rather dire straits sort of situation if Malcolm Brown is able to work his way into my lineups here for week 3.
Let's go a little deeper. Let's think about like a 14-team PPR league. Brandon, is Tariq Cohen playable as an RB2 or as a flex, especially in this potential high-scoring matchup with the Falcons?
Man, I guess not as a flex, not as an RB2, as a flex. I guess you could rationalize it, but he hasn't really been that active in the passing game so far, and they're getting David Montgomery more active in that capacity. Like I'm thinking about Rex Burkhead. I would rather play Rex Burkhead over Tariq Cohen this week, and there's a few other guys that you might surprise you that I would play over Tariq Cohen as well. The guy, in my mind, he's one of the more overrated players in the league, and he just got paid. And I'm like, I don't know. He's been very inefficient. I know he's been a high level kind of running back in the passing game in terms of volume and catches, but he's very inefficient with those. And last year was like almost historically inefficient in terms of, yards per target out of the running back position. So, yeah, not a big Cohen fan. I could see you having to do it in a 14-team league, but I think there's probably some better options you're not realizing.
Let's get to one more start or stash, and it's about the Jets receivers. Chris Hogan, Braxton Barrows, are any of these guys viable if you're looking for a wide receiver 3 this week, Beller?
No, absolutely no. No way. No way. They're in this position because of injuries. This is not going to be a good spot for them. At some point, opportunity can't be everything, right? We always talk about opportunity, and it is key to success in this game that we love. But opportunity is not everything. It's one of 3 major inputs: opportunity, environment, and talent. And these Jets receivers who are now in this position, they've got that first one. I'm not sure how much they have of either of the other 2. So, they're going to start. They're going to be out there. They can't help but fall into 6, 7, maybe even 8 targets. But I'm not confident in the value of those targets or what they are going to be able to do on the receiving end of them. So this is an easy stay away. Some situations just flat out stink, and that is the case in New York right now. The one guy I will throw in, if you're looking for a preemptive ad this week, maybe LaMichael Pirine is not someone who is bad to add, because as long as Le'Veon Bell is out, Pirine is the one guy in that running back room who can make some things happen. Frank Gore is what he is at this stage of his career. Pirine could be somewhat interesting if he does get an opportunity for the Jets. He could be an interesting week ahead ad. The rest of that team, just stay away from them.
An absolute mess right now. We got a question there from Aubrey. Actually, we got one from Alper. Any faith in Darius Slayton? He seems like the only good Giants asset right now.
I kind of like Darius Slayton. He flashed last year as a rookie, did better than a lot of people expected. Big guy who can go deep and make plays on contested catches. But what we've seen the first weeks, can do a bit more than that. Using him on those kind of slants and using his big body and a little bit shorter and intermediate range as well. And I think, there's, as long as there's only 2 Giants wide receivers between 3 in the lineup, then you can feel good about both of them, but I think Darius Slayton has the highest upside in that passing game for sure.
Beller, would you play him over AJ Green?
I would play him over AJ Green actually this week, and it's exactly what Brandon said. The fact that we only have those two receivers right now, meaning Darius Slayton and Golden Tate, I like those guys a lot going forward as long as Sterling Shepard is out. You also take Saquon Barkley off the board, and we're talking about a high-volume back. I don't even necessarily care so much about the targets that were in this discussion because it's not just the targets. It is the attention in the offense that he commands, and there is no one in New York who commands that attention. So it's not like Darius Slayton is suddenly going to go in the backfield and get 5 carries, but that's not the point here. The point is that you are taking a must-use high-volume player out of the equation, and you're still going to have the same number of snaps generally. You're still going to have the same number of plays run generally for this Giants offense. But now you look at who the playmakers are. With Saquon gone, with Sterling Shepard gone, at least for this week, it is clearly Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, and Evan Ingram. And what Darius Slayton brings to the table is a unique skill set that you're not going to find duplicated in anyone else. Evan Ingram and Golden Tate, different players, but they are sort of duplicative in their skill sets. Darius Slayton is the unique guy in this offense. Now, it's always been Saquon Barkley, but now it's Darius Slayton. So I do think that he is a nice really get here this week and going forward. So long as Sterling Shepard is out, I think we're going to be looking at these Giants receivers the same way we did last year when Sterling Shepard was out.
Yeah, it does get a lot more complicated, though, as Brandon says, if you get all three of those guys healthy all together. Let's move on to our fill in the blank segment. I think it's the most fun part of the show at the end of the week. I love going through these because I never know what's coming up next, thanks to our great producer, Nando DeFino. Let's begin with the first one. This Detroit-Arizona game will be blank than advertised for fantasy players. Let's go to you first, Brandon.
I know that you're pushing us to say better or worse. I'm going to say funner. I think this is potentially going to be the funnest game when you're sitting there and you're watching Red Zone or whatever. I think you're going to be watching this game a lot because I think there's going to be a lot of scoring. And I think there's going to be just some big plays, just like an anything could happen kind of game where you look back on the week and go, man, that Lions Cardinals game, that was great to watch. And maybe it comes down to a field goal. I think the Lions are going to make this a close game as well. I'm still leaning the Cardinals here, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
All right. What do you think, Beller?
I'm going to say Kyler than advertised. This is going to be even more of a Kyler Murray game than we think it's going to be here, you guys. He has taken that step, right? We always thought that he could be the next player in the pattern. We had Patrick Mahomes 2 years ago, Lamar Jackson last year, and everything pointed to if someone's carrying that torch on in 2020, Kyler Murray is the guy. He has been doing it through the first 2 weeks of the season. Now he gets a very soft matchup against this Detroit team. I think he just goes off, and we're starting to see some Kyler Murray early MVP candidacy columns come Monday morning. This guy is just putting it all together in this offense built around him in year 2. So give me all the Kyler Murray in this game on today.
I love hearing people who have faith in the Lions keeping games close, keeping games interesting, because I've watched for my entire lifetime as they have disappointed me at every single turn. So I think it might be a little worse than advertised, but I'm just being a wet blanket for the sake of being a wet blanket. I'm sure it's going to be
the Lions
fine.
have a ton of close losses in there.
They lead the league in close losses in their existence. They are the epitome of close losses. They're great at it. They're elite at losing close. Well, all they got to do is keep it close from a fantasy perspective. All right, the one player I just kind of have a good feeling about in week 3 is, we'll go to you first, Beller.
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually going to stay in that game and say DeAndre Swift because of the fact that I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game. And as Jake mentioned earlier in the show, DeAndre Swift is getting the most snaps for that team, at least out of the backfield. His role is growing ever so slightly by the week. We already know how they want to use him. They were not shy about going right back to him in week 2 after that ugly drop in week 1 against the Bears cost them the victory. That is a lot of confidence in a rookie, and we know that he is, again, the one guy with the unique skill set in that backfield. Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson, they're fine. They're going to do what they do, and they're fine players, but there's really not a whole lot special about what those guys bring to the table. There's something very special about what DeAndre Swift can do, and if you can picture yourself in a game against this Arizona team where we're getting up and down the field, where we got to score to keep up, who's the running back in Detroit that you want on the field in that situation? Who's the guy who you want to be in there if you have to go hurry up, if you're going no huddle to keep up with Kyler Murray and the Cardinals? It is so obviously DeAndre Swift because of what he can do both as a runner and a receiver. I think we see a really nice game out of him here this week.
I actually like that call, despite all my lifelong concerns about the Lions disappointing me. How about you, Brandon? One player that you just kind of have a good feeling about in week 3.
It's Devin Singletary. We haven't talked about him today, but Zach Moss is out with the toe injury. And we haven't, we kind of early on in the summer, we thought this could be Devin Singletary's year. Actually, once Buffalo drafted Zach Moss, we kind of started to be a little worried about that actually happening. And then the first 2 weeks, we've seen Zach Moss take a considerable amount of snaps away from Devin Singletary. But Moss is out. Singletary is getting 13 touches per game so far. He's getting targeted 5 times per game on average as well. You got to bump those numbers up. And this Rams defense against running backs has been kind of susceptible, giving up 4.5 yards per carry to the running back position. So I think this is a game that will be close. And I think Devin Singletary has a good chance to get 20 or more touches in this game. I've moved him once I saw that news well into my, not well into it, but into the back end of my top 20 running backs.
I think those are both good calls. Singletary definitely interesting from a DFS perspective this week as well with the expected uptick in his workload. Let's move on to the next one. Jerick McKinnon will finish today with blank PPR fantasy points. Let's go to you first, Brandon.
I will say 12.7.
12.7. All right, let's turn this into an over-under. Over-under 12.7 PPR fantasy points for Jerick McKinnon today, Beller.
I'm going to say over. The number I had in my head, and this is not just Price is writing things or anything, is 13.5. I just feel like the one concern I have for Jerick McKinnon, and there are places where I am starting him, but the concern I have for him is that if he is going to score, it's going to have to be a big play. We have to assume that Jeff Wilson's going to be the guy in there once the 49ers get inside the 5-yard line. Maybe on a third down inside the 5-yard line. If you've got Nick Mullins taking a snap out of shotgun, you're going to have Jerick McKinnon in there. But any short yardage touchdown is far more likely to go to Jeff Wilson than it is to go to Jerick McKinnon. And we love those, quote, easy touchdowns for running backs. I'm not sure that's going to be there for Jerick. So he needs to get a big play, most likely, to get into the end zone. And no matter who you are, even if you're Christian McCaffrey, it's hard to bet on a big play touchdown being in there for you on any given week. So I'm going to say that he doesn't get in the end zone, and because of that, limits his PPR ceiling just a little bit. I'll say over the 12.7. I'll put him at 13.5, somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 total yards and 4 catches, something like that this week.
12.8 would have been Price is writing me.
Yeah,
well, yeah, for sure.
12.8 would have been the correct answer for that. But if you ask me to choose between Mike Davis and Golden Tate for my flex spot in a PPR, I would start. Let's go to you first, Beller.
I'm going to go Mike Davis here. The floor is just so much higher for a running back. We know those touches are going to be there. Golden Tate, probably has a higher reception ceiling and even a higher reception floor than Mike Davis does this week. But we saw what happened with Mike Davis with the Panthers in catch-up mode a week ago. Caught 8 out of 8 targets. So that is something that he can do as well. The floor is just so much higher for a running back. We know the touches are going to be there. As much as I like Golden Tate, those touches are still not guaranteed. You still need good work from the offensive line. You need good work from Daniel Jones. You need Golden Tate to get open. So many more factors go into a receiver getting a touch than a running back getting a touch. And given where we expect Mike Davis to be here today with Christian McCaffrey out, I would go with him. Even in that PPR format, still think that he is the better play than Golden Tate.
I don't know that there's a whole lot more to add to that. Beller said that Tate might have the higher receptions upside, but I'm just looking in the last 2 years, 8's been his highest catch total. So Mike Davis just reached the upside of Golden Tate in that department last week. So maybe not so much of an advantage there for Golden Tate in that department. But then you also throw in the rushing volume that Mike Davis is going to get. Yeah, it's a sweep. It's Mike Davis for me as well.
All right, so check this out. We have the top 10 PPR scorers in week 3 since 2015. It's the split of all splits. You can see the list there up on the screen in front of us. It's wild. You see Mike Evans, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, Devonta Freeman, T.Y. Hilton, Julio Jones, Larry Fitzgerald, A.J. Green, Keenan Allen. Does this mean anything? So I'll put this in the form of a fill in the blank. This means blank. We'll go to you first, Beller.
that these guys have been good in week 3 for whatever reason over the last 4 years. I guess is how I will fill in that blank. It's fun. It's fun to think about. But basically what that tells us is that the players who have been very good over a long stretch of time are very good, no matter when, right? We would expect those guys. I bet if we said, the highest scorers since 2015 from week 7, we would see a lot of those same names on there as well. So great players are great pretty much no matter when things happen in the season, and that's why it is always hard to get them out of your lineups, right? Matchups don't matter when you have true greatness on your side, and that's what we've seen in a lot of those names.
Yeah, how about you, Brandon? I mean, it's just a fun split, right? It doesn't really have a lot of meaning.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm moving Mike Evans way up in my rankings, and it wasn't really. Yeah,
he was already like wide receiver 5. Now you've got him at wide receiver 1.
Right, exactly. Hey, it's impressive that a wide receiver's beating out Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers in scoring there in week 3. Yeah. That jumped out at me, but I think it means as much as a guy having a history against a certain team. Like, every time that he played those teams in the past, there was something different weighing into that. So it's just random, but to Beller's point, a lot of good players on that list, which just means that the good players, are going to always bubble to the top most weeks.
Yeah, good players with longevity. I saw a comment float by. There was an expectation that the Falcons-Bears game will be very defensive. Do you guys see that happening? That was from Matt. I don't see it. I don't think the Bears defense is the prototypical Bears defense. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting tripped up. What do you think, Beller?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been the Bears defense that we've expected to this point of the season. All things considered against the Giants last week. Talking about a team that lost its best player in the moment, right? They didn't have any time to prepare for no Saquon Barkley. They lost him in the first half. They lost Sterling Shepard a little bit later, and then the Giants were still able to make that game pretty interesting in the second half. Week 1 against the Lions, they jumped out to a big lead in that game, and Adrian Peterson piled up 90-plus rushing yards on just 15 carries, somewhere right in there. So, this Bears defense has not been quite what we expect. Still a good defense, but not a lockdown unit completely. Eddie Goldman, that he's been a huge missing piece to this defense, and Atlanta has been just totally victimized. And to their credit, they've been victimized by Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott. A lot of defenses are going to be victimized by them, but no, I would not expect to see a total. This isn't going to be 35-34 necessarily, but I think it'll be closer to that than it would be to 17-13 or something along those lines.
The Atlanta defense is so bad. I mean, Tack McKinney, Kinley, and Grady Jarrett. Yeah. Those are 2 really good players. But if you watch the games, those are the 2 guys that look like they can do anything. Everybody else is very very generous so far. So I don't know. I can't. It could be defensive on the Chicago side, but this is such a great Atlanta offense that it probably won't be. It could be. I mean, for the Atlanta, it'd have to be just a Mitch Trubisky complete meltdown, like the bad side of Mitch just being there from the start. And I'm not ruling that out, but I think that they'll be able to find a way to move the ball down the field a bit.
That's always in play. Bad Mitch is always in play, and more likely than it ought to be.
That's just Mitch. That's not even bad Mitch. That's just Mitch.
That's just normal Mitch. Everyday, regular Mitch. We got one more question we're going to get to here before we talk Survivor picks. What do we have here? There it is. It's from Kaylee. It's a half-point PPR league. McKinnon, Josh Kelly, or Mark Ingram. Pick 2. Who are you going to sit from that group, Brandon?
Definitely playing Kelly. He's my favorite of that group. And I guess the PPR aspect, and we heard Matt Barrows come on and say it, the McKinnon is being rolled out as a receiver as well. I guess I'm going to go Jerick McKinnon. I actually think this is going to be Mark Ingram's best game so far. I think because it's such a big game against Kansas City, we're going to see the veteran a little bit more than the rookie in that backfield. But I'm still going to give the slight edge because of the half PPR to McKinnon.
Yeah, there would be a huge pit in my stomach no matter who I sit out of this group of guys. I would lean towards sitting McKinnon, though, just for the reason I said earlier that I don't think the easy touchdown is going to be there for him. And I agree with you, Brandon. I think in this game of AFC heavyweights on Monday Night Football, we're going to see a little bit more Mark Ingram. You got to trust the guy who you can absolutely trust. So I think we do see his most involved game of the season on Monday Night Football. I wouldn't be surprised if any one of these 3 outscores the other 2. It's a tough decision to make, but for me, I'm going Ingram and Kelly.
All right, before we sign off, let's get your guys' survivor picks. Who holds up? Who makes it through the pool this week? And Beller, who's possibly on upset alert this week?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone is on upset alert who is going to be a very popular survivor pick. I do like Houston to go into Pittsburgh and win that game, but you're probably not picking Pittsburgh as a survivor here in week 3. I like I like the Colts, obviously, 11.5-point favorites, a totally hapless, injured Jets team that they get to go up against this week. That is going to be the most popular pick, and for good reason. I think that's a good one. I also like the Browns at home against the Washington Footballs. I think this is a nice spot for that offense to get going, for the defense to get after Dwayne Haskins a little bit. So those would be my top 2, but this is a week where I'm not going to try to get too cute, even though the Colts are probably going to be the most popular play on the board. Anywhere that I've got them available in Survivor, I am taking them.
It feels like one of the few times I'd even consider using the Browns, so maybe that adds a little bit of appeal to
Colts
get
too,
off
maybe.
of the favorite. Yeah, the Colts aren't looking real good either. What are you going to do in Survivor this week, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going to follow whoever's playing the Jets week in and week out. I did that last week with the 49ers. I'll do it with the Colts this week. I'll say the upset watch is the Saints. It didn't look good. And now I don't know what they are currently. They opened the week at like 3.5-point favorites over Green Bay. I don't care that Devonta Adams is out. I think Aaron Jones looks like one of the very best running backs in the league right now, and a versatile one at that. I think he can get used in this passing game. But I think New Orleans, I don't know that they deserve to be the automatic favorite at home, especially when you're not really playing with that New Orleans crowd.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Are they just getting the automatic 3? Is Vegas still just giving that all the time, even though crowds are either not there at all or very limited? It certainly is a different environment right now. And not having Michael Thomas, they've had an extra week to start making some adjustments coming off that game against the Raiders. I think that's a pretty big deal as it pertains to the Saints offense sort of finding its stride here in week 3. That is going to wrap things up for our Week 3 episode of the Athletic Fantasy Cheat Sheet.
I agree with Chris
by
there.
Jock Market. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I
Nice
appreciate your kind
timing.
words.
DVR with the
Perfect
mic
timing.
drop here. I am awesome. We are out of here.
Yeah. Oh, hey, look, check out Jock Market. Take control of your fantasy sports experience. Download the Jock Market app now in the App Store. The Android app's coming soon. Start making money today. And get all of our written content, including Jake's rankings, for just $1 a month at theathletic.com/cheat sheet. For Jake Seeley, for Brandon Funston, for Michael Beller, Matt Barrows, and our man behind the scenes, Nando DeFino, I'm Derek Van Riper. Thanks for watching. Good luck in week 3.